Bring it.
I've done candidate recruitment for American Federation of Teachers, and these are really low budget campaigns, maybe $6,000.
Yeah.
They need to understand the text of election code, campaign finance law. They get themselves into trouble so fast. I mean, I literally threw away boxes and boxes of campaign cards that were illegal. I said, there goes $2,000 in your budget because you printed those cards illegal, you know, and they need legal advice. I mean, you know, so I understand quite well why oftentimes when we recruit candidates who go for an attorney, they have more confidence that they can understand that law, that they can come up to speed on it. They have confidence that they can speak in public. They have to speak in hostile crowds, which is not the easiest thing to do. And another aspect of this is, think about Sonny Bono in Congress. How easily do you think he was manipulated? Because he didn't understand the legislation he was voting on. I mean,
Yeah. So I do not want to understate how hard it is to run a modern campaign, and how, you know, I marvel at the complexity of election laws, even for something like my state's General Assembly, which is about as expensive as that.
it's all choose.
So I'm not saying running a campaign is easy. What I'm saying is that it's learnable. That even somebody who didn't start out an attorney can learn public speaking skills. That even someone without training in how to interpret legislative language, with support, can pick that stuff up. And you know, the question about competence once you get there, the sort of nice thing I think about our political process, one of the many advantages of our structure is that people often don't jump straight into Congress because they're famous. The types of people who I'm interested in do exactly that. They start out at city council, they maybe get their butts kicked a few times, they learn, and of the people who are most talented and most ambitious, those move on to state ledge, those move on. And this happens naturally within our political process. I think the key is you get people in the door in the first place. You take that first step. And then what we're seeing, at least in the New Jersey case, is after that, the political process takes over from there. It you know, sort of screens out the people who don't like it or aren't good at it, or keeps them at lower levels and brings people up. And so I'm not so concerned if we're talking about starting candidate training programs to get more county commissioners and more city council members who are blue-collar workers. I don't think you'll ultimately have a bunch of blue-collar versions of Sonny Bono.
You have to have the training program.
Yeah, but I mean,
if you've got a 3-month campaign,
yeah.
you know, I'm planning to teach them the election code.
But you could, honestly. You just said you know which postcards are legal and which ones aren't, right? I don't know. I mean, I'm probably about as ignorant as anybody when it comes to actual election laws, like the fine points of can I put this seal on this side of the postcard. I bet you could teach just about anybody the rules if you had the time, if you had the resources. What I'm saying is, somebody brings you these really sharp working class candidates, I bet you could do a lot with that.
Working class grads can be tremendously helpful in a campaign. Tremendously helpful.
Yeah.
And one of the best candidates I ever worked for was a lawyer who used to be a blue-collar worker.
Oh yeah?
And she used that blue-collar experience constantly in the campaign. It's extremely effective.
So this is exactly my hunch, is if we brought qualified working class people, created pipelines that would get them in the hands of people who can do the training really well, that we would have lots of success stories. And this is, by the way, very different from the narrative that people will tell you sometimes, which is working class people don't hold office because they don't have what it takes. They're not smart enough, they don't work hard enough, whatever. And that, I think, is a very different story than what we're talking about here, which is if you can get qualified people into the hands of, sort of people who know election law, you can have lots of success placing people in political office.
Dora Applewitz's talking about the growth of the cooperatives in the United States, and the numbers are really high. I've forgotten the numbers now, but it's in the tens of millions at least of people who work for cooperatives. In the smaller cooperatives, people take on all the jobs. You know, they may be a treasurer today, and tomorrow clean the bathroom.
Yeah.
That gives them the type of exposure and confidence that would lead to this sort of thing. How about taking that targeting that group and seeing?
I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm glad you brought up co-ops. I didn't sort of go there in this talk, but they're sort of a nice analog to the argument I'm trying to make. So my favorite example, did you ever hear this window factory in Chicago?
Yes.
Yeah. So this window factory in Chicago, the owners come in, they say, we're shutting it down, giving you 3 days notice. It's December. The workers occupy the factory. The owners say, okay, we'll give you severance pay. They reopen the factory a few months later. A couple years later, same thing happens. The owners say, we're giving you no notice. We're putting you all out of job. And what happened the second time around is the workers raised $1.2 million through financing and cash, bought the company, hauled it piece by piece to a new location, managed it themselves. Literally, the line workers just took over the company. It's been in business, that was 2012 when they opened their doors. It's called New Era Windows. If you're buying a window in the Chicago area, I highly recommend this company. Because the workers, the people who were working the line, took over the company essentially overnight and ran it competently ever since. And that is more or less analogous to what I'm saying I think we could accomplish in politics. There are lots of people who say, oh, workers could never run a company. That's why we have managers, because it's a different skill set. You need to know how to negotiate. You need to have number sense.
You got the Madrid cooperative in Spain that has hundreds of thousands of employees. But in Europe right now, they have what they call a precarious class. Have you heard about these? These are young people who don't have full-time jobs or real jobs, but they volunteer for things, and they're on this edge of they're constantly in a precarious situation. And they say one of the ways that they're going to eventually be able to be incorporated into society is through co-ops, and that's where they're working with them.
I think co-ops illustrate that it's a real mistake to underestimate the ability of working class Americans to solve complicated problems.
In the 70s, I think it was Walter Dean Burnham who spoke of the hole in the electorate, that American turnout was lower because there was not the presence of a Labor or Social Democratic Party in this country. If you were to look at Canada, where there's a Social Democratic Party with deep ties to organized labor, would you expect to see, has anyone done any comparative work, more working class representation? The other thing is, all the example you're giving of candidate training were coming from organized labor, and our labor movement has been devastated.
Yeah.
So doesn't it imply the first step is to rebuild organized labor somehow?
Yeah. So I should mention, I worked at the world's largest Walmart. I was actually fired for trying to unionize it. It's in Kansas. Although they did tell me when I was whisked out of the store 22 minutes after I sent the petition around, I was still welcome to shop at Walmart. Still happy. But this is a serious point. All the candidate training programs I just put up on the screen are in what's left of the American labor movement. They're in states that are heavily unionized that have legislation that supports organizing. The big question is, can that model, or one of the big questions is, can this model really travel to a state like Kansas, where I got fired, or North Carolina, where I live now, where if you wear an AFSCME t-shirt, people will yell at you in the line to buy a honey baked ham, which also happened to me. And the answer is, I think so, but I think you have to marshal. The thing is, in the absence of labor, there are lots of progressive organizations that aren't labor, that don't use the language of labor, but that still exist on the ground. There are community action projects, there are networks of fiscal organizations. I think you leverage the other progressive pro-worker groups that do exist in all 50 states, because the work that you're doing when you do candidate training is not the same as the work I don't think you can organize without laws and unions. I do think you can identify, recruit, and train talented blue-collar workers even without labor unions. That said, we're testing it out. I'm running a candidate training in North Carolina, so we'll see if the model travels, but I think it will in a way that other forms of organizing don't without laws. Now, your other question is, when there are unions, do you see more working class people getting into office? It looks that way. The answer seems to be yes. I'm starting to do some comparative cross-national research, and it looks like that hunch is true. Just like in the US, the places that we see candidate trainings popping up and supporting workers are labor-dense states. It looks like cross-nationally labor-dense countries have more working-class people. That said, unions aren't the whole story, because even countries with really strong labor movements don't have huge percentages of working-class people getting into office. So there's something else going on that I think is interesting, but I think your hunch is right that unions help working-class people get into office.
I'm from Chile, and we got a huge thing with unions and business together. Like our communist party is huge there too. So I was thinking maybe something related to that. It's like it's more like a background thing. It's like since it's elementary school, they put you together and you got like the president of the class. But each class got their own president. It's not just a whole school. For example, you got. And then they get together, you gotta create stuff. It's more like, since you're little, they force you to be part of, be a little politician. So you think that, I mean, I don't know.
No, I agree with you that schools are probably where this ultimately starts. Wednesday after next, I'm giving a talk at my 6-year-old son's elementary school, where I'm going to talk about why working class people should hold office. So I agree that I think I would put that kind of intervention, the Chilean model, in the sort of policies that would change the ambitions of millions of working class Americans. I think that's how you do that, is you start at school, it's nationwide. I would put that in the category of sort of the really ambitious, change people's self-perceptions and attitudes and get them thinking. I've done less research on how you would set something like that up in the U.S., but my hunch is it would work if you could really take it to scale, right? If you could really get every elementary school in the country telling lower income and working class kids, you can be the next president, and really like investing in it that way, training to get in those habits of mind of thinking of politics as cool and thinking of themselves as capable of leading. I think that would do it through this other channel of sort of ambition.
Yeah, like there's a new generation competition. I have the school movement that was happening during the president here. It was actually, they went on a strike for like a month. They took over the schools, and nobody were able to go to school during that time because they were like, we want free education for everybody. We want equal rights for everybody. And since you're little, you're like encouraged you to participate. And right now, they're like a 3 or 4 of them. They're doing the leaders during that time. They're Congress.
Yeah, no. I like schools because they're everywhere. Schools are challenging because education policy is complicated and it's in these interesting special districts that are in charge of it. But I like schools as a possible mechanism. To be honest, I just don't know as much about how to use schools in the U.S.
Yeah, my parents were like school is something
yeah. Well, there you go. There's your research project. How do we work that model here?
So we'll take one more question here.
So I thank you for speaking to us today, and I love what you were talking about changing hearts and minds of gatekeepers, right? To incorporate. But one of your earliest slides talks about that final gap, right, which is between running and winning. What do we do there to address issues that even in local elections, how many dollars you have to invest in a campaign makes a huge difference in your electability? Does your research touch on any of that, or?
A little bit. So the money thing is tough, and it's, I think, as big as you're describing. The encouraging thing about money is that I think among successful politicians, most of them would say they weren't like natural fundraisers. Unless you work in a university development office, you're probably not in the habit of or comfortable with hitting up your friends and loved ones for money. So the encouraging lesson there is fundraising is unpleasant for everyone, and it's learnable, it's teachable. This is sort of the lesson, I think, of the experience of Lillian's list. people were saying the same thing. Well, women won't be good elected officials because they are not as good at fundraising as men are. And Lillian's list said, well, no, a little bit of training, a little bit of seed money, and actually these campaign accounts are just as big as male candidates. And so my hunch is it would work the same way. If you gave working class people seed money and training, the kind of training that everybody needs, they would be able to raise money just as well, for the simple reason that, and I hear this time and again from when I talk to actual elected officials, everybody hates fundraising.
How do you deal with the fact that, at least my understanding is that most campaign finance laws right now, there's no limit on how much of your own money, right, that you can funnel into those campaigns, and so that puts working class people at a disadvantage.
It does. I think you only counter that with seed money and
excellent fundraising above
and fundraising ability, because I mean, it's true, rich people can always give to their own campaigns, but it's not unbeatable, and fundraising is not unlearnable. And so that's, to me, the sort of point where that's what makes me optimistic on this specific point. That said, maybe history will prove me wrong, but I'm going to do my very best and keep trying.
Thank you.
So you can come up, visit with Nick if you want to afterwards.